So I still remember the smell of lilies that filled my sister's wedding hall. Sweet, suffocating, and almost cruel. Everyone was glowing under chandeliers worth more than the hospital room where my son was fighting for his life. The laughter, the glittering champagne, the orchestra, they all blended into one endless melody of betrayal. My parents stood at the center of it all, beaming with pride. Their hands wrapped around the same check that could have saved my child's heart. But they chose lace and diamonds over blood and breath. Dada, my sister, Hannah, was the golden child, the one who never had to ask twice. When she said she wanted a fairy tale wedding, my parents sold land, dipped into savings, and took loans just to see her smile. But when I came to them with trembling hands, clutching the doctor's report that said my 6-year-old son needed emergency heart surgery costing, 85 zozanol, they didn't even blink. My father said, "We've already spent so much on the wedding, Emma. You'll have to find another way." Another way. As if there were an aisle I could walk down to find a miracle. Until that night, I stood outside the hospital window, watching my son's chest rise and fall, each breath a countdown. I could hear the distant echoes of wedding music playing across town. It was the cruelest harmony. Joy and despair dancing to the same rhythm. I called every friend, every charity, every distant relative who owed me a favor. Some promised to see what they could do. Most didn't call back. My parents didn't even visit. My mother sent a text that read, "Stay strong. We're praying for you." Tata, I wanted to scream. Prayers wouldn't pay surgeons. Faith wouldn't buy blood. Love, it seemed, had a price tag, no 85,000 to be exact. And my parents decided it wasn't worth it. Teja, 3 days later, my sister's wedding went viral. Her dress trended on Instagram. Her makeup artist got booked for a year in advance. And my parents were praised as the most generous, loving family. Meanwhile, my son's pulse was fading, the monitor beeping slower each hour. The world applauded their love while mine bled in silence. Teja, that night, I made a promise. Not to God, not to fate, just to myself. Teja, if my parents could put a price on compassion, I'd show them what it truly costs to lose everything money can't buy. One day, they would understand that betrayal doesn't fade. It compounds, it festers, it blooms into something far sharper than revenge. Teja, and when it does, it doesn't ask for 85,000. It takes everything. Said, they say desperation makes you dangerous. And that night, I became both. The moment I left that hospital, with my son's life tethered to a machine and my parents sipping champagne under a crystal sky, something inside me cracked open. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a storm gathering strength in silence. Tada, I sold everything I owned. The car, the jewelry from my wedding, even my engagement ring. I stood in pawn shops at midnight, begging for extra dollars, feeling the sting of humiliation with every lowball offer. Friends whispered behind my back, "She's gone crazy." But I didn't care. Pride couldn't save my son. Money could. Tada, then came the night when I met Dr. Patel, a cardiologist with tired eyes and a heart too big for this world. He looked at the chart, then at me, and said quietly, "Emma, if you can arrange half, I'll handle the rest through the foundation." That was the first moment in weeks that I felt something other than pain. Hope. Fragile, trembling hope. Tenja, within 2 days, I scraped together 42,000. I still remember walking into the hospital, clutching that envelope like it was a second heartbeat. The surgery was scheduled. I sat outside the operating room for 6 hours, staring at the red light above the door and whispering every prayer I knew. When it finally flicked to green, I collapsed. My boy was alive. Weak, pale, but alive. Sato, the nurse, placed his tiny hand in mine, and I wept like the world had finally stopped spinning. But joy in my world never stayed long. Tada, 2 weeks later, my parents visited. Not the hospital. My apartment. My mother walked in like she was entering a courtroom. My father stood behind her, avoiding my eyes. She said, "We heard the surgery went well, that's good. But, Emma, you've made us look heartless in front of everyone. People are asking why we didn't help." Tada, her words hit harder than any slap. Heartless. They were worried about their reputation, not their grandson's life. I laughed, that bitter, broken laugh that sounds more like a cry. You care about what people think? You should have cared about your own blood. Tada, my father sighed, shaking his head. You've always been dramatic. We did what we could. Teja, no, I whispered. You did what was convenient. Kita, that day, I realized something powerful. They hadn't just turned their backs on me. They had given me the greatest weapon of all, a reason to rise. Tata, so I began to plan. Not out of hate, but out of purpose. If they valued appearances above humanity, I'd show the world their real faces. Piece by piece, truth by truth. But first I needed power, money, influence. Everything they believed I would never have. Tada, because someday soon, they'd stand before me again. Not as parents, but as beggars of the very mercy they once denied. Tata, the months after my son's surgery were a blur of sleepless nights and silent rage. I worked 3 jobs, hospital receptionist by day, diner waitress by night, and freelance bookkeeping on weekends. My body ached, but my resolve burned hotter than ever. Every beep of my son's heart monitor reminded me what love truly meant: sacrifice. The kind my parents never understood. Tada, one evening, after another 12-hour shift, I sat beside my sleeping boy, scrolling through photos from my sister's honeymoon in Santorini. My parents were in half of them, dressed in designer clothes, laughing under golden sunsets. The captions read, "Family means everything." The hypocrisy hit me like a blade. I promised myself I'd build a life so radiant that their wealth would look like dust beside it. Today I started small, saving every penny, taking online business courses at night when my son slept. I discovered a knack for numbers and strategy, something my father used to mock me for. "You'll never survive in business," he once said. "You're too emotional." Funny how emotion became my greatest fuel. Then came the spark that changed everything. A client from my bookkeeping job introduced me to a group of investors looking for someone trustworthy to manage finances for a new tech startup. I didn't have credentials, but I had something better: hunger. I pitched myself with everything I had, my voice trembling but my spirit unshaken. They hired me. Tada, within months, I turned chaos into order. The startup grew, doubling profits, then tripling. The CEO took notice and made me chief financial officer. I could hardly believe it. Me, the girl who begged for her son's surgery, now signing contracts worth millions. Each success felt like a quiet slap to the faces of those who once called me the burden. Tada, years passed, and the small company became a national brand. My son grew stronger, brighter, and more curious. He'd often ask, "Mom, why don't we visit Grandma and Grandpa?" I'd smile sadly and say, "Because sometimes, love isn't what people say, it's what they do." Tanta, but fate has a way of circling back, doesn't it? One rainy afternoon, I received a call from my sister, her voice trembling. "Emma, Mom and Dad are in trouble. Dad's company went bankrupt. They might lose the house." Teta, for a moment, I said nothing. My reflection in the office window looked nothing like the broken woman they'd abandoned. I wore confidence like armor now. And yet, deep inside, a part of me, the daughter who once begged for help, wanted to cry. "Tadao, Ima, please," my sister whispered. "You're successful now. You can help." Tadao, I closed my eyes, hearing echoes of my father's voice. "You'll have to find another way." Tada, and maybe, I thought, that's exactly what they'd have to do now. Tada, because destiny, it seemed, had finally remembered my address. Jajaja. The day they showed up at my office, I almost didn't recognize them. My father, once towering and proud, looked smaller, his posture bent under invisible weight. My mother, the woman who once wore pearls and perfume like armor, now clutched a faded handbag, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. For a moment, I froze. Years of anger, hurt, and disbelief collided inside me. The people who once chose luxury over life were now standing in my doorway, begging for mercy. "Teja, Emma." My mother's voice cracked, and she reached out as if I were still her little girl. I didn't move. The air between us was heavy, thick with unspoken memories. My father cleared his throat. "Your mother and we've had some financial troubles. My company went under. The bank's taking the house. We thought maybe you could help us get back on our feet." Teja, his voice trembled on the last word, and for the first time in my life, I saw him uncertain, not the confident patriarch, but a man stripped of power. I leaned back in my chair, staring at them, my mind flashing back to the hospital room. The sound of my son's fragile breathing, the cold emptiness of their absence. "Tateo," I wanted to yell, to throw every ounce of their cruelty back in their faces. But instead, I smiled, calm, controlled, like the professional I had become. "It's interesting," I said softly, "how life works, isn't it? You once told me to find another way." I did. Jiajia, my mother's eyes filled with tears. "Emma, we made mistakes. We didn't understand." "Tajia," I interrupted. "No, you understood perfectly. You just didn't care." Tanzhao, there was silence. My father lowered his gaze, his voice barely audible. "We were wrong." Tajia, I studied him carefully. For years, I had imagined this moment, their regret, their apology. But now that it was here, it felt empty. No apology could erase the nights I spent wondering if my son would live to see another sunrise. No words could rewrite the cold text message that replaced compassion. "Dada," finally, I spoke. "I can't give you money," I said, standing. "But I can give you advice, the same kind you gave me. Find another way." Tajia, I turned and walked to the window, watching the city skyline shimmer in the evening light. "You built your world on appearances," I continued, my voice steady. "Now you'll have to learn to live without them." Tajia, my mother, began to sob quietly. My father muttered something about dignity, about pride, but his voice broke halfway through. I let them leave without another word. The door closed, and the silence that followed felt both satisfying and strangely hollow. Zeta, as I stood there, I realized revenge wasn't the fiery explosion I'd always imagined. It was quieter, colder, like standing in the ashes of a house you once loved, knowing you didn't have to burn it down. It collapsed on its own. Tadza, but fate wasn't finished. Tada, because a few weeks later my sister called again, and this time, the story she told would change everything I thought I knew about my parents, and about what justice truly meant. Tajajak. Taja, when my sister's name flashed on my phone again, I almost didn't answer. But something in me hesitated, a tug between curiosity and caution. Her voice on the other end trembled, raw and uncertain. "Emma, please, don't hang up. You need to know something. It's about Mom and Dad." Taja, I leaned back in my office chair, heart steady, voice calm. "Go on." Tada, she took a shaky breath. "The reason they refused to help with Liam's surgery, it wasn't just selfishness. Dad, he was hiding debt. Massive debt. He borrowed money from people he shouldn't have, and he used my wedding as a cover to move funds and make it look like everything was fine. The money wasn't theirs, Emma. It was all borrowed." So down for a moment, the world tilted. I'd built my rage on the foundation of their cruelty, but now the ground beneath it shifted. "Are you saying they couldn't help?" "Teja." "No," she whispered. "They could have. But helping you would have exposed everything." They were terrified of losing their reputation, of people finding out Dad was bankrupt. So they let you think they didn't care, because the truth was worse. Tetsuo, I pressed my hand against my forehead, my pulse pounding. They let my son almost die to protect their pride. Tadza, Hannah started crying. I didn't know until recently. Dad tried to fix things, but when it fell apart, he lost everything. And now, the people he owes are after him. That's why they came to you. Tadza, I sat in silence, the sound of her sobs fading into the hum of my office lights. For years, I had carried this pain like a torch, burning everything that reminded me of them. But hearing this truth didn't extinguish it. It twisted it into something else. Pity. No, not pity. Clarity. They hadn't refused me out of malice alone, but out of fear. Cowardice disguised as love. Teta, later that night, I drove to the old house. The one that once smelled of fresh bread and lilacs, now dark and lifeless. Through the cracked window, I saw them sitting together at the kitchen table. My mother's hands trembled as she counted coins from a jar. My father just stared into space, broken, silent. Teta, I stood outside for a long time, hidden in the shadows. I could have walked in. I could have offered help. I could have ended their suffering with a single word. But I didn't. Dada, because sometimes, mercy can be its own cruelty, especially when the people you're saving never showed you the same grace. Tada, as I turned to leave, lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating their worn faces for a split second. I realized then that life had already punished them far better than I ever could. Tada, but the story wasn't done. Because a week later, a news headline appeared that changed everything, and put my parents' names back in the spotlight, dragging me along with them. The morning the news broke, I was sipping coffee in my penthouse office, watching the city awaken beneath a haze of rain. My phone buzzed, message after message, notification after notification. Then I saw it. Local businessman and wife caught in financial fraud investigation. Lavish lifestyle exposed. And right beneath the headline, my parents' faces. The same faces that once glowed with pride at Hannah's wedding now stared blankly from the screen, humiliated for the world to see. The article tore them apart. It detailed every shady loan, every fake investment, every desperate attempt to keep their reputation afloat. Social media was merciless, calling them liars, hypocrites, parasites of wealth. Within hours, they were trending. My father's old business partners publicly distanced themselves. My mother's friends from her social club vanished. Dada and my name was there too. Their daughter, now a successful financial executive, declined to comment. For a moment, I stared at that line, my reflection hovering above it on the phone screen. Declined to comment. It felt powerful and hollow. That evening, I drove home in silence. Liam sat on the couch, doing homework, his small voice lifting the fog in my chest. Mom, are you okay? I smiled faintly. Yeah, baby, just thinking. He looked at me with those same gentle eyes that once blinked under hospital lights. Grandma and Grandpa, are they in trouble? I hesitated. They are. I admitted softly. They made mistakes, and now they have to face them. He nodded thoughtfully, then said something that shattered me. You always told me good people help others, even when they don't deserve it. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind. Peeling away layers of bitterness, I thought I'd turned to stone. I'd built my whole life around justice, proving I didn't need them, showing the world their cruelty. But what if the final act of revenge wasn't destruction? What if it was something they could never understand? Mercy. The next day, I visited them. The old house looked smaller now, more fragile, like it was holding its breath. My father opened the door, his eyes rimmed red. Emma, I didn't expect. I saw the news, I said simply. They invited me in. The kitchen was cold, the cupboards nearly empty. My mother sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. For a long while, none of us spoke. Then, quietly, I said, I'm not here to save you. But I'm not here to watch you drown either. My mother's lip quivered. You'd help us. After everything? I took a deep breath. Not for you, I said. For the child you let almost die, because he still believes in forgiveness. The room fell silent. My father looked at me with something I had never seen before. Genuine remorse. Not the kind meant to repair reputation, but the kind born from ruin. I stood to leave, placing an envelope on the table, enough to keep them from the streets, nothing more. This isn't redemption? I said softly. It's a lesson. As I stepped into the rain, I realized something profound. Revenge might feel powerful, but forgiveness, that's what sets you free. For weeks after I left that envelope on their table, I expected silence. But silence didn't come. It was replaced by something far more unsettling: humility. My father, once too proud to say, thank you, called me a week later. His voice was fragile, stripped of authority. Emma, I don't deserve your kindness, but I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. I didn't know what to say. I simply told him, then start with the truth. And he did. Piece by piece, confession by confession, he began to rebuild something I thought was dead. Honesty. He met with the people he'd deceived, admitted his fraud, and offered whatever small restitution he could. The same man who once bought silence with cash now faced shame with open eyes. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it was a start. My mother was slower to change. For her, image had always been armor. But the scandal had shattered every illusion, and in the ruins, she found something rare: reflection. She started volunteering at the children's hospital, quietly, without telling anyone. When I found out, she looked embarrassed, as if goodness itself was a secret. I needed to see what you went through, she whispered. Those mothers, they reminded me who I used to be before money became my god. I wanted to hate her. I really did. But standing there, watching her wipe a tear from a stranger's cheek, I realized she was finally paying the debt that mattered most. The human one. Tada months passed, and life moved forward. Liam grew healthier, stronger, running through the park with a laugh that healed every crack in my heart. Sometimes my parents joined us, sitting on a bench at a distance, unsure if they were welcome. I never said yes, but I never said no either. That was enough. Tada then one afternoon, as autumn painted the city in gold, my father asked to meet me alone. We sat in the same cafe where he once told me I was too emotional for business. Now his hands trembled as he slid a folder across the table. It's the deed to the old house, he said. It's in your name now. I want you to have it. Tato, I stared at it, my chest tightening. Why? Taja, he sighed. Because I built that house on lies, and you built your life on truth. Maybe it'll mean something good in your hands. Tidza, for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the clinking of cups and the soft hum of forgiveness settling between us like dust after a storm. Jaja, when he stood to leave, he paused by the door and turned back. Ima, the day I chose Hannah's wedding over Liam's life, I thought I was protecting our family's legacy. I see now. You are the legacy. Zeta, and just like that, the revenge I'd been carrying for years lost its shape. It wasn't fire anymore, it was light, fierce, calm, and steady. Jada, but as peace began to bloom, fate had one more surprise waiting for me, one that would test every ounce of grace I had left. Tetyajakada. It was a cold Sunday morning when the phone rang again. I remember the sound, urgent, shrill, slicing through the peace I'd finally learned to live in. I almost didn't answer. But when I did, my sister's voice came through, broken and shaking. Emilet's dad. He collapsed. Massive heart attack. They don't think he'll make it. Tada, for a few seconds, I couldn't move. The world went quiet. Like time had been sucked out of the room. My father, the man who once stood unshakable, untouchable, was now lying on a hospital bed somewhere, fighting the same battle my son once fought. Life had come full circle, and fate was handing me a choice I never thought I'd face again. Zeja, when I reached the hospital, the smell hit me first. That sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic, so much like the one from years ago, when Liam lay under the same fluorescent lights. My steps faltered as memories crashed over me, the beeping monitors, the cold metal chairs, the sleepless nights of prayer and rage. And now, here I was again, only the roles had reversed. Jada, my mother, sat in the waiting room, her hands clasped tightly in prayer, eyes swollen from tears. The moment she saw me, she broke down. Emma, please, I can't lose him. Not like this. Taja, I didn't know what to feel. Anger, pity, justice, maybe all three. I wanted to walk away, to let fate deliver the punishment it had promised. But then I saw the reflection of my son in the hallway mirror. His innocent eyes looking at me, silently reminding me of who I'd become. The woman who rose from ashes not to destroy, but to heal. Taja, when the doctor came out, his words were heavy. He needs immediate surgery. There's a chance, but it's risky and expensive. Taja, my mother turned to me, her lips trembling. We don't have the money, please. Taja, the irony hit me like a punch. $85,000. Almost the same number that had once divided love from indifference. I looked into her desperate eyes, the same eyes that once looked at me with cold detachment, and for a moment, I was back in that hospital corridor years ago, clutching my own child's life in my hands. Tata, I took a deep breath and said quietly, I'll cover it. Tata, she gasped, sobbing uncontrollably. Emma, why? After everything. Taja, because Liam deserves to see what mercy looks like, I whispered. Taja, hours later. I watched through the glass as surgeons worked to save the man who had once refused to save my son. My heart didn't burn with vengeance anymore. It ached with understanding. Tada, when the surgery was over, the doctor approached me. He made it, he said. Barely, but he made it. Tada, that night, as I stood beside my father's hospital bed, I realized the full circle of fate's lesson. Love denied can turn to pain, but love returned, even undeserved, turns pain into peace. Tatao, I reached out and held his frail hand. Rest now, I murmured. You've finally paid your debt. Tata, his eyelids fluttered open for a second, and in a trembling whisper, he said, You saved me. Tata, tears blurred my vision. No, Dad, I said softly. You saved yourself by giving me the chance to forgive you. Dad, outside, The morning light broke through the clouds, gentle and golden, like forgiveness itself. Tajajabe said the days after the surgery were quiet, not the silence of tension, but of healing. My father recovered slowly, every breath seeming to carry a weight of regret and gratitude mixed together. I visited often, not out of obligation, but because something deeper pulled me there, the strange, gentle ache that comes when bitterness begins to fade. Tada one afternoon, as I sat by his bedside reading reports from work. He stirred and motioned weakly for me to come closer. His voice was frail, but his eyes were clear. Emma, I used to think money protected us, that it proved we were worth something. But lying here, I realize I traded love for numbers. You taught me what wealth really is. I swallowed the lump in my throat. It took us both too long to learn that. Tada, he smiled faintly. Better late than never, my girl. Tada, in that moment, I saw not the man who had broken me, but the father who finally understood what he'd done. And for the first time in years, I let him hold my hand. No resentment, no armor, just quiet humanity between us. Senja, when he was discharged, I helped him move into a small apartment. He refused to live off my money. I'll earn my way again, he said stubbornly. Even if it's with small steps. I nodded, proud and sad all at once. My mother stayed with him, and together they began rebuilding something I'd thought was impossible humility. Tada, weeks later, we gathered for dinner. My parents, my sister, my son, and me. The same family that once fractured under greed now sat around a modest wooden table, laughter echoing where once there had been lies. Liam was telling a story from school, his hands animated, his laughter contagious. My father listened like every word was a miracle, and my mother couldn't stop smiling. That after dinner, my sister pulled me aside. You changed them, Emma, she whispered. You changed all of us. I shook my head. No, life did. It just used pain to teach us what comfort never could. As I drove home that night, city lights glittering like fallen stars, I thought about the long road that had led me here, the betrayal, the poverty, the revenge I once craved. I realized that true justice isn't always loud or public. Sometimes it's quiet, like the sound of a heart mending in its own time. I looked at my son sleeping in the back seat, his face peaceful under the soft glow of passing headlights. The same boy who once lay between life and death had unknowingly become my compass, guiding me back toward grace when I wanted to drown in hate. And in that moment, I understood the real lesson: forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It redefines it. It turns scars into maps, reminders of where we've been, not what we've lost. Little did I know. Life had one last twist waiting for me, not punishment, not pain, but a gift I never saw coming. A year after my father's surgery, spring came early. The air was lighter. The world softer somehow, as if even the sky had forgiven us. Liam's laughter filled the house that morning as he chased our golden retriever through the garden. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching sunlight spill across the floorboards, warm, golden, and new. It was the same light that had once streamed into hospital rooms and empty apartments, only now, it felt different, peaceful, deserved. My phone buzzed with a familiar ringtone. It was my father. Morning sunshine, he said, his tone light, almost playful. Your mother and I were thinking, it's time we did something good with what's left. What do you mean? I asked, smiling. He chuckled softly. We're setting up a small foundation. For families who can't afford medical care. For parents who are where you once were. We'd like to name it after your son. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The Liam Hart Foundation. The name hung in the air like a benediction. All the pain, all the nights of anger. Every sleepless hour spent clawing through despair. It all led here. To this. A circle closing not with vengeance, but with purpose. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered. Dade, Mom, thank you. He paused, his voice trembling. No, Emma. Thank you for teaching us how to be human again. That evening, we held the first small fundraiser in a community hall. Nothing grand, nothing expensive. Just people, stories, and hope stitched together by second chances. My mother stood at the podium, reading a speech she'd written herself. We once believed love was proven by how much we could spend, she said. Now we know love is proven by what we're willing to give up. The crowd fell silent, Even my father, standing beside her, wiped away tears he didn't try to hide. Tadao, when it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the faces, strangers' families, survivors, and then at my parents, sitting in the front row, holding hands. This foundation isn't just about saving lives, I said, my voice steady but soft. It's about saving what's left of us after pain. Because sometimes, the ones who hurt us most are the ones who need healing too. Tada applause followed, but I barely heard it. I was too busy watching my son in the audience, smiling up at me with pride. Tada later, as the event ended and the hall emptied, my father approached. He took my hand, the same one I once reached out to him with years ago in vain, and said, "You gave us back our hearts, Emma. You were always the better part of us." Tata, I didn't answer. I just hugged him. Not out of duty, not out of pity, but out of love. Real, raw, hard-earned love. Taojiao, when I drove home that night, the city lights shimmered in the rearview mirror, each one reflecting a memory. A wedding, a hospital, a promise, a redemption. Tad's life had come full circle. And as I tucked Liam into bed, he asked, half asleep, "Mom, are we happy now?" Tada, I kissed his forehead and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. We're finally home." Tada, outside,